The end game is getting people into housing.
And next Tuesday, voters are deciding whether or not the rules should be changed.
My concern is people will vote for it because they only look at the objectives. They don't know the unintended consequences.
We are hearing from both sides of the debate over whether to lower the threshold for agreement on passing new bonds.
We should be building a much higher consensus to pass new taxes.
We're asking who Prop 5 might help and who it might hurt.
I would challenge anyone to come tell me why it's not the solution.
This is CBS News Bay Area with Elizabeth Cook.
I'm Anne Makovec in for Liz, and we are live from our state-of-the-art virtual election headquarters with just 4 days until Election Day. Today, we are talking about money and the rules to pay for some of the state's most pressing projects. That is at the heart of California's Proposition 5. Supporters say it'll make it easier to get cash for crucial things like roads and housing. But critics say we're all going to feel that pain in our pocketbook. Both sides joining us live this afternoon to make their case. We are in the final stretch to Election Day, and this afternoon we are taking a closer look at Proposition 5. If this passes, it would have ripple effects for years by making it easier to pass bonds to pay for housing and infrastructure. But as Devin Feely reports, it could also potentially raise property taxes.
You got to take what you can get. I mean, if you want to be out of the rain.
This is not where most of us would want to spend even one winter night, let alone the winter of our years.
I haven't had a place in years, my own place.
But for Dave, who turned 68 this month, this is home, a tent on the banks of Coyote Creek in San Jose. Dave says he ended up here because he can't afford to live anywhere else.
The end game is getting people into housing, and I think most politicians agree with that, conservative or liberal.
Pastor Scott Wagers is a homeless advocate and supports Prop 5, which would make it easier to pass bond measures for affordable housing and infrastructure projects.
The unhoused crisis has caused the quality of life to come down for everybody. So I think the investment that the average voter has in solving the problem or getting them into housing, even if it means them being taxed a little more, is that you're going to have a better city.
Prop 5 would fundamentally change how communities decide to tax themselves, rewriting California's Constitution to lower the threshold needed to pass bond measures from a 2/3 majority, or roughly 67%, down to 55%.
We can't keep taxing and taxing and taxing and saying we're concerned about the cost of living, because every tax raises the cost of living.
Former San Jose City Councilman Johnny Camus is a fiscal conservative and fears that home and business owners would be saddled with an ever-growing list of new taxes if Prop 5 passed.
Because bonds are paid over a 30-year period, what you're actually doing is putting the tax burden on future generations. And it's unfair to have a simple majority or even 55% as a consensus. We should be building a much higher consensus to pass new taxes.
Opponents of Prop 5 say even though its goal is to address the lack of affordable housing statewide, they're concerned it may actually have the opposite effect.
The more property taxes go up along with everything else, the more likely I am to raise my rent. And so that's not good for them, and it's not good for me.
Roberta Moore owns a small apartment complex and is far from convinced that giving the government more money will solve the problem.
My concern is people will vote for it because they only look at the objectives. They don't know the unintended consequences, and they don't know how poorly the government implements on its programs.
But Pastor Wagers, who's seen the state's homeless crisis worsen, says there's a price to inaction as well.
When you do put them in housing, and you got money for housing, that's the solution. And I would challenge anyone to come tell me why it's not the solution.
It's now up to voters to decide how they want to come up with the money to address pressing issues like homelessness, affordable housing, and infrastructure. But for homeless men and women like Dave, they say they are often overtaxed by the daily demands of surviving on the streets.
It's murder, dude. Serious murder. Because every night I don't sleep. I don't sleep good.
Now, it is important to point out that Proposition 5 only needs a simple majority to pass, not 55% that would be required to pass local bonds under Prop 5. Today, we're going to be joined by both sides of the debate. Coming up after the break, we're asking supporters of Prop 5 why the Constitution should be changed and what this really means for our taxes. Well, we are continuing our conversation right now about California's Prop 5. It would get rid of a rule that's been in the state constitution since 1879. Without that rule, communities would only need 55% of the vote to approve new bonds. Today, we're talking to people on both sides of the Prop 5 debate. And let's start with David Klein right now from the California Taxpayers Association. Thanks for being with us today.
Yes, thank you for giving us the opportunity.
Now, I know you are against Prop 5. What are your concerns here?
Yes, we definitely are against Prop 5. The reason being, it seeks to address the problem of affordability being, California being unaffordable in a way that would actually make California even more unaffordable. It would pave the way for property tax increases, which eventually get passed along to everybody. If you own property, you're going to be paying directly. If you rent property, you're going to be paying indirectly. And, anytime a property tax gets raised on a store, you could expect the prices are going to go up. So it affects everyone. It raises taxes, and it makes the state even less affordable at a higher cost of living.
Now, and you did say paves the way, which is important because it doesn't raise any taxes right off the bat. It just gives local government the ability to more easily pass some of these taxes. When you're talking about that magic number, that 55% that this would change it to instead of the 2/3 majority, don't you think 55% is enough? It is a majority.
Well, the 2/3 vote has been in the state law since, as you mentioned before, 1879. And we haven't had a housing crisis the entire time California's been a state. Basically, it ensures that when you have a bond that is going to cost a lot of money to property owners and is going to take 30 years to repay with interest, that you have a widespread community support. And the 2/3 vote has ensured that. It means that when bonds are introduced, they have to make sense to a wide swath of the community. And we've seen that they do pass. More than half have passed in the last couple of election cycles. So it's not an insurmountable amount by any means.
So let's talk numbers. I mean, how much could homeowners actually see their property taxes go up if local governments have this ability to pass measures more easily?
Right. Well, it really depends on the community. The voters would have the say, obviously, so they could start rejecting them more often than they do now if they wanted to. But in general, it increases, $60 here, $100 there, $150, and pretty soon that adds up to quite a substantial sum. It would add to the taxes that are already on your tax bill. You see the base property tax that's based on the value of your home. You see parcel taxes for schools, libraries, vector control centers, what have you. And often those add thousands of dollars to your property tax bill. So this would be even more costs on that bill. And like I said, it would get passed along. Even if you don't own the property, you're going to be paying somehow.
And again, this is, depends on the community that you live in, which you kind of reference. This could really vary widely depending on where you live. But that is one of the arguments in favor of the prop, that it would give more control to local governments. What's your response to that?
Well, I mean, there is no lack of control right now. It just requires a 2/3 vote. And as I mentioned, more than half are passing already under that vote requirement. And it's a reasonable threshold because when you consider that you're basically saying that taxes are going to increase for about 30 years while you repay this bond. And every dollar that you borrow from a bond, you pay back with interest. It's about $1.70 to $2 that it costs you. So it's not a very good way to finance things if you don't have to. And when you have a 2/3 vote, that ensures that people think, okay, this is actually the only way to finance this. So we're going to bite the bullet and pay a lot more than just what we're borrowing. But in the big picture, it is not an insurmountable goal. It's just it requires the voters to approve it.
Anything else in our last 30 seconds that you really want voters to know about why they should say no?
Yeah, just a recent poll came out, showed that the cost of living in California is the number one problem for most voters. Democrat, Republican, Independent, everybody picked cost of living. And this will make it worse. It will increase the cost of living in California, And that's why we think you should vote no.
All right, David Klein, we appreciate it, and we're going to be right back.
Thank you.
We invite you to join us Tuesday and all week for CBS News Bay Area coverage of America Decides. We'll be tracking the very latest CBS News projections on our data map as the battle for the White House comes down to the wire.
We'll be following the close races all across the Bay Area, including the San Francisco mayor's race and 2 recalls in the East Bay that could change the direction of a city and settle questions about crime and punishment. A team you can trust, the latest numbers of virtual election night experience.
It's America Decides on CBS News Bay Area.
Experience, Wednesday nights at 7:30.
We're going to hear from somebody who supports that proposition, Prop 5. That person was going to be joining us live on our broadcast, but that person is now not able to make it. So we have done our best to inform you about Prop 5 and what it would do. Basically, it's changing the threshold from 2/3 in order to pass a bond to 55% of the vote in order to pass a new bond, and that would be at the local level. Also important to point out that this would also be retroactive. So any of the bond measures that are already on the ballot this year would be subject to that prop if it passes or if it doesn't. We will continue our coverage on that. Meantime, former President Donald Trump and Vice President Kamala Harris focusing on the so-called blue wall today with stops in Michigan and in Wisconsin. That comes as the final weekend ahead of Election Day marks the end of early voting in most states. Christian Benavides has more details from the Buckhead neighborhood of Atlanta.
The race for the White House shifts to the Midwest today. Prior to a rally in Janesville, Wisconsin, Vice President Kamala Harris called down former President Donald Trump's comment about former Republican Congresswoman Liz Cheney.
She's a radical war hawk. Let's put her with a rifle standing there with 9 barrels shooting at her, okay? Let's see how she feels about it. You know, when the guns are trained on her face.
This must be disqualifying. Anyone who wants to be president of the United States who uses that kind of violent rhetoric is clearly disqualified and unqualified to be president.
Trump doubled down on his criticism of Cheney during a stop in Michigan.
If she had to do it herself and she had to face the consequences of battle, she wouldn't be doing it. So it's easy for her to talk, but she wouldn't be doing it. She's actually a disgrace.
Trump and Harris will hold dueling rallies in Milwaukee tonight. A major focus for both campaigns has been getting supporters to the polls. That's resonated with early voters who've set records in many states, including here in Georgia, where more than half of eligible voters have already cast their ballots. There was a steady flow of people at this polling place in Atlanta's Buckhead neighborhood for the final day of early voting here.
I am very upset with our current government and the way things are being run. The border is a major, major issue, not to mention the economy and numerous other things.
Why is it that you're voting for Kamala?
Because I think she has a respect for people, the people of the United States, and wants to really represent their interests, and I don't think that of the other candidates.
While election workers deal with millions of voters, they're also dealing with misinformation. Georgia's Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger went public to refute a viral video alleging to show Haitian immigrants voting multiple times. U.S. intelligence agencies believe the fake video is the work of a Russian government disinformation campaign.
And don't forget, KPIX is your election headquarters. We're going to have full coverage and up-to-the-minute results on election night on multiple platforms. You can find us on KPIX and PIX Plus, as well as streaming on the free CBS News app. Thanks for watching. You can always get all the latest headlines and weather over on PIX Plus. And remember to like and click the button on the bottom left of your screen to subscribe for the biggest Bay Area news.